The Quiet Reunion. No one saw coming. The rain hadn't yet started, but the air smelled like it. A soft grayness settled over Los Angeles as if the city itself had paused to exhale. Somewhere along a quiet hill, far away from the noise of red carpets and cameras, a black car slowed to a stop outside an art gallery, one that had been closed to the public for years. Keanu Reeves stepped out slowly, his tall frame straight despite the ache in his knees that no one but he knew about. He wore a dark coat, a gift from someone he hadn't spoken to in years, and in his left hand was a small white flower. No press, no assistant, no script, just him and something unresolved. Inside the gallery, a woman stood alone in the soft glow of track lighting. She wore a navy blue dress that moved like whispers when she walked. Sandra Bullock. She wasn't dressed for a premiere. No makeup artist had touched her face today. She hadn't expected to see anyone. Least of all him. They hadn't spoken in almost a decade. Not deeply, not truthfully. There had been public smiles, interviews, stories of admiration. But beneath it all was something fragile and aching. A silence that had never truly been broken. She turned before she heard him. She always did that with him, like her heart was tuned to his frequency. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world shrank. No cameras, no applause. Just two souls who had taken the long road back to each other. "Hi," Keanu said softly. Sandra blinked as if steadying herself. "You came." He walked toward her, his steps slow, deliberate, almost unsure. "I didn't know if I should, but I heard about this exhibit, and about you." She smiled faintly, and it wasn't the one she used for movies. This one carried weight, memory. It's not for the public. It's for healing. He looked around at the paintings, portraits of strangers with eyes full of stories. Brushstrokes like weather patterns, emotions trapped in color. "Is that what this is?" Sandra turned away, folding her arms like she was bracing against something. "I think so. Or maybe I just wanted to remember how to feel again." Keanu stood beside her now, close but not touching. "Can I ask why now?" Her breath caught. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Because grief doesn't follow schedules. And because the only person who ever really understood my silence was you." The room went quiet. And in that quiet, 1,000 memories stirred. The first time they met, laughter over terrible coffee on set, long drives where no words were needed, the day they almost kissed but didn't, the night they almost said, "I love you," but left it unsaid, the years that passed, the people they lost. The things they never dared to speak. "I missed you," Keanu said suddenly, his voice rough, almost surprised by its own honesty. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment. "Don't say that, unless you mean it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." She turned to face him again, and her eyes were glassy with the kind of emotion that had no name. "Why now, Keanu? Why come back now?" He hesitated, then pulled a folded letter from his coat. It was creased, faded, old. He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling. It was a letter she had written to him 9 years ago. She had never sent it. Her eyes widened. "How did you get this?" "I found it," he said gently, "tucked in the back of a book you gave me. You said you wanted me to read it when I was ready. I wasn't ready then, but I am now." The letter wasn't long, but it said everything. How she had loved him quietly. How she had watched him from afar, with pride and sadness. How she had chosen silence over complication. And how she hoped that if he ever read it, it wouldn't be too late. Her fingers trembled. "I was a coward." "No," he whispered. "You were human." Silence fell again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't painful. It was full, like the pause before music begins. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out something else. A tiny photo. Old, slightly bent. It was from the set of Speed. The two of them laughing like kids, Sandra with a soda can in her hand, Keanu with one arm around her shoulders, mid-laugh, unaware that someone had captured the moment. "I carry this," he said, almost shyly. "Whenever things got too hard, I'd look at this and remember what joy looked like." Tears slipped down her cheeks then, silent, unannounced. He stepped closer. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a romantic embrace. Not yet. It was something deeper. A hug that held years inside it. All the pain, all the forgiveness, all the unspoken hope. Keanu's arms closed around her with the gentleness of someone who had lost too much to ever take comfort for granted again. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't need to. In that quiet moment, Sandra closed her eyes and breathed into his chest. And the cameras missed it. The tabloids never knew. But somewhere in the silence of a forgotten gallery, two hearts realigned. Not because of fate, not because of a script, but because healing sometimes looks like two people showing up, even if it took them years to get there. And in that hug, millions of hearts watching this story one day would remember their own longing, their own second chances, and maybe, just maybe, they'd believe that love, no matter how late, still finds its way home. The whisper that changed everything. The night settled around them like a blanket, quiet and oddly comforting. The gallery was still, its walls echoing memories more than voices, and yet the energy had shifted. Something had been unlocked between them, something old and sacred. Keanu didn't step back right away. Sandra didn't let go either. That hug, born out of years of restraint, had turned into an anchor. No one said it out loud, but both of them knew it was a beginning of something that once almost was, and now begged to be again. Only slower, wiser, quieter. Outside, a gentle rain finally began to fall. Sandra leaned back just enough to see Keanu's eyes. There was a stillness in them, like he was holding back not just words but a lifetime of what-ifs. "I never thought we'd get a moment like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He just studied, her face as if memorizing the new lines time had drawn across her features. She was more beautiful now, not because of youth, but because she had become real, raw, fully human. "I came close," he finally said. "So many times, Sandy. I would write a message, then delete it, dial your number, then hang up. I watched. Your interviews, your award speeches, always wondering if you missed me too." She turned away then, walking toward one of the paintings, a portrait of a faceless woman standing in a storm. "I missed you more in the quiet moments, in the spaces no one sees, when the applause fades and you're left with nothing but the echo." Keanu followed her. "Why didn't you reach out?" She was quiet for a long moment, then finally said, "Because I thought maybe I'd miss the window, that the version of me you loved only lived in the past." His brow furrowed. "I never stopped loving you." It just turned into silence. There it was, the sentence that neither of them could ever say back then. Not during the chaos of rising careers, not when agents filtered their time like currency, not when everyone else had something to say about their every move. But here, under these soft gallery lights and among portraits of other people's truths, their truth finally got to breathe. Sandra turned toward him, her hand brushing the edge of the canvas behind her. "You know, I used to imagine a world where we did get together, where we weren't afraid of ruining the friendship." "And what did it look like?" he asked. She let out a quiet laugh, not of amusement, but of nostalgia. "It looked like this. Just you and me. No lights, no cameras, just quiet." Keanu looked down, then stepped closer. He reached out, gently taking her hand. It felt natural, familiar, like remembering the chords to a song you haven't played in years. "I was going to propose to you once," he said. She blinked. "What?" He nodded. "Years ago, after the lake house, I had the ring. I'd rehearsed a speech. But then your life moved so fast. You were adopting, I was grieving, and the world kept spinning." A stillness washed over her face. She wasn't shocked. Not really. Deep down, she had always felt the tension between them. Always sensed there was something suspended midair that neither had dared to touch. "I would have said yes," she whispered. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of those words cracked something in him. Even back then? Especially back then. And then, for a moment, they just stood there, hand in hand. Two timelines brushing against each other. The past they could have had, and the present they still might. After a while, Sandra asked, "So, why now? Why did you finally come?" Keanu exhaled deeply. "Because I realized I'd rather have one honest day with you than a lifetime of pretending I didn't care." They didn't kiss. Not yet, but their souls did. In the quiet way that doesn't need touch or sound. Just truth. Later that evening, they left the gallery together. Keanu insisted on walking her to her car, despite the drizzle. The rain wasn't heavy, more like a mist, but it blurred the city lights in a way that made everything feel cinematic, as if the universe had cued the perfect backdrop for a second chance. As they reached her car, Sandra hesitated. She didn't want the night to end, but she wasn't sure what came next. Should they go separate ways again? Pretend this was just a moment? Or were they standing at the edge of something real? Keanu sensed it. "Come with me," she looked up. "Where?" "Just, come with me," she paused. "I'm not dressed." "I didn't plan on," he interrupted, smiling gently. "No plans. No scripts. Just you, me, and an old motorcycle." She raised a brow. "Are you serious?" "I still ride it." "The same one from years ago," Sandra chuckled, shaking her head. "You haven't changed." "I have," he said quietly. "But the part that loves you, that part never did." She didn't say anything. Just got into her car, followed him through the winding hills, until they reached a place far from everything familiar. A cabin tucked between trees. Quiet, isolated, safe. Inside, it smelled like cedar and memories. Old books lined the shelves. A cracked leather couch waited beside a fireplace. It was the kind of place where nothing loud ever happened, but everything important did. Sandra walked slowly, taking it all in. She ran her fingers along the edge of a photo frame. A candid shot of Keanu as a young man, laughing with someone now long gone. The pain was visible in the corners of the room, but so was the peace. "Is this where you disappear to?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "When I need to remember who I am," she turned to him. "Who are you now?" He stepped closer, the soft hum of the rain against the window the only sound between them. "A man who's done waiting." She could feel her chest tighten. This wasn't just nostalgia. It wasn't just old friendship. It was something that had been growing quietly between them for years, beneath the interviews, the red carpets, the passing lovers. A tether that had survived time, loss, and silence. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, not asking, just remembering. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. Sandra's voice came out barely audible. "What?" He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You're the only thing I ever regretted not fighting for." She didn't cry, not then. Instead, she let out the breath she'd been holding for years. "I'm still here," she whispered. "It's not too late." And with those words, the dam broke, not between them, but inside them. The weight of years, the missed calls, the avoided moments, the unspoken feelings, they all spilled out in that cabin where no one was watching, where they could finally stop performing. He held her again, but this time, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, deep, full of longing, and she whispered something that would change everything between them. "Don't disappear again?" He pulled back, looked into her eyes, and promised the only way he knew how. "I won't." The day she let him see her heart. The sun filtered through the lace curtains of the cabin, casting a golden hue across the wooden floorboards and furniture that seemed like it hadn't moved in years. Outside, birds chirped with careless joy, unaware of the two souls inside finally daring to cross the quiet bridge between what they had once buried and what they might still become. Sandra stood at the window with a coffee mug in hand, her eyes tracing the outline of trees dancing in the wind. Behind her, Keanu watched, not just the way she moved, but the way she breathed. For a man who had spent a lifetime surrounded by scripts, he knew instinctively this was the moment none of them could ever write. She turned to find him staring and smiled, not shyly, not flirtatiously, but like someone who had finally taken off a mask. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," she said, her voice still raspy from sleep. Keanu leaned against the frame of the kitchen archway, arms folded, wearing a simple black t-shirt. "That's why I come. It's the only place I can hear my own thoughts. Or someone else's heart." Her expression shifted slightly as if those words reached deeper than he realized. She sipped her coffee, her hands cradling the warmth. "Then maybe today is a good day to tell you something I never could before." He said nothing, only nodded, his eyes steady, inviting. Sandra took a breath, then moved to the couch, setting her mug down. "Do you remember the letter I wrote you? The one you found in that old book?" Keanu sat across from her, still holding her gaze. "I memorized every word." "I didn't send it," she began, "because I was afraid of what loving you would cost. We were in the spotlight, both of us. Every time I tried to imagine us together, I saw headlines, speculation, public obsession, and I was terrified that something that beautiful would be turned into something fragile." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You were protecting it." "I was hiding," she corrected gently. "I thought maybe if I buried it deep enough it would fade. But it never did. It only changed shape." He nodded slowly, his voice lower now. "What shape is it today?" Sandra smiled, her eyes glistening. "Today, it's not a crush. It's not infatuation. It's not even just love. It's gratitude. For you. For the way you never pressured me. For how you respected every silence I gave you. Even when it hurt." Keanu leaned back, staring at the ceiling like he was trying to slow the speed of his own heart. "I've lost a lot of people, Sandy. Some to tragedy, others to time. And I used to think love was something that either stayed or disappeared. But now I think sometimes it just waits." The silence that fell between them wasn't hollow. It was rich, like the pause before a symphony begins. "Come with me," she said suddenly, standing up. He looked up. "Where?" "Just trust me." Minutes later, they were in her car heading toward the coast. Neither of them spoke much. Keanu didn't ask questions. Sandra didn't offer answers. She drove like she had done this drive alone many times before, as if each curve and hill had held pieces of a memory she was now ready to share. After almost an hour, they arrived at a modest beach house, nothing luxurious but full of charm and history. She parked, turned the engine off, and simply looked at him. "This place," she said softly, "was my sanctuary after my mom died. I would come here and cry until I couldn't breathe, until the sound of the ocean drowned out the ache." Keanu looked at her with quiet understanding. "You never told me that." "I didn't tell anyone," she replied. "But I wanted to show you today because this is where I realized that love doesn't need a spotlight to be real. It needs space. It needs silence. And it needs someone who understands that sometimes a heartbeat is louder than words." He followed her inside. The walls were lined with framed black and white photographs, not of celebrities or red carpets, but of nature. Stillness, trees, waves, shadows. She led him to the back porch, where a pair of chairs faced the endless blue horizon. They sat. The ocean stretched before them, wild and calm all at once. Sandra turned to him. "I brought someone else here once. Years ago, I thought he was the one." "He wasn't." Keanu didn't flinch. "Why not?" She looked out toward the waves. "Because he needed to be seen. You always saw me, even when no one else was looking. For a long time, neither of them moved. And then, Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a folded, weathered page. "I wrote you something, too," he said. "A long time ago? I never sent it either." She unfolded the page slowly. It was a poem, simple, raw, unfinished. But every line breathed of longing, of tenderness, of the kind of love that doesn't scream, but waits quietly in the corners of a life. She read it once, then again, her lips trembling. "Why didn't you send it?" she asked. "Because you deserved a man who wasn't afraid of the world," he said. "Back then, I was scared of what would happen if I stepped forward." She folded the poem, held it close to her chest. "So what happens now?" He reached over, took her hand. "Now, we stop waiting." And for the first time in their long, complicated, beautiful journey, Keanu kissed her. Not the way a man kisses an actress, not the way a co-star kisses a co-star, but the way a soul finally finds home. It was slow, reverent, like they were learning each other for the first time and remembering all at once. When they pulled apart, the wind carried the sound of the ocean like applause. But they didn't need it. Keanu looked into her eyes. "Let's not waste another decade." Sandra nodded, her voice barely above a breath. "Let's write the rest. Together." The promise he made. Under the stars. The beach had fallen silent, and the sky above glowed with thousands of stars. Not the painted, commercial kind found on Hollywood sidewalks, but real ones. The kind that didn't care who you were, how famous your name was, or what movies you made. Keanu sat beside Sandra on the back porch of the beach house, both of them wrapped in an old knitted blanket she pulled from a wicker chest near the doorway. The chill of the night air brushed against their skin, but neither of them moved. Not because they weren't cold, but because they didn't want to break the sacred stillness between them. The ocean roared softly in the distance, as if it too knew this moment had waited years to arrive. There were no assistants checking schedules, no makeup artists fixing hair, no fans, no scripts. Just two people who had been everything to the world but not nearly enough to themselves, until now. Sandra leaned her head against Keanu's shoulder, her fingers playing absently with the edge of the blanket. "Do you believe in soulmates?" she asked, not looking up. Keanu tilted his head, thinking, his eyes fixed on the stars. "I think the word's been romanticized too much," he said after a long pause. "People think it means perfection. No conflict, just a magical fit. But the way I see it, a soulmate is someone whose scars recognize yours. Someone who doesn't fix you, but never lets you forget you're not alone in the dark." Sandra's eyes fluttered closed as those words settled inside her chest. "Then yes," she whispered, "I believe in soulmates." A gust of wind danced across the porch, and instinctively Keanu pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. His movements were slow, deliberate, protective, not possessive, and for Sandra, that made all the difference. She had been with men before, men who loved the version of her they saw on magazine covers, who kissed her like they were performing for a crowd. But Keanu was different. He kissed her like she was silence he had been waiting to sit inside. And now, as they sat under the night sky with nothing but breath between them, she finally felt safe enough to speak the part of her heart she had always hidden. "I was scared that if you loved me, I'd lose myself," she admitted, voice barely a whisper. "Not because of you, but because I didn't know how to love someone who actually saw me." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He reached down and took her hand gently, cradling it between both of his. "That's the tragedy, isn't it?" he said quietly. "We spend our lives becoming who we think the world wants us to be, and then, when someone comes along who wants the real us, we hide." She nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "I hid for so long. Behind movies, behind laughter, behind, 'I'm fine.'" Keanu turned toward her then, his voice firmer. "You don't have to hide anymore." Her lips trembled slightly. And then, with a breath full of vulnerability, she whispered, "Then promise me something. Anything." She looked into his eyes now, full of both courage and fear. "Promise me that if we do this, if we try again, you won't disappear. Even if I push, even if I get scared again, I need to know you'll stay." Keanu leaned in and touched her forehead with his, closing his eyes as their foreheads rested together. "I'm not that man anymore, Sandy. I've lost too many things by letting them go, and I should have held on. I won't make that mistake with you." He pulled back only enough to look her in the eyes, and then he said something he had never said to anyone. "Not in this way, not with this weight. I'm home. And my home is you." A tear slipped down Sandra's cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, let it be seen. She had always been the strong one, the one who smiled through heartbreak, who laughed when she wanted to collapse. But here, in the arms of the only man who ever loved her for the silences between her smiles, she let herself be soft. They sat in the quiet for hours, wrapped in that old blanket, their bodies close, their hearts closer. And at some point Keanu stood, offered her his hand, and she followed him inside the house. But he didn't lead her to the bedroom. Not yet. He led her to the old record player tucked beside a bookshelf, one he had spotted earlier when they walked in. He ran his fingers across the collection and pulled out a vinyl with no label. "What is this?" he asked. Sandra smiled. "A mixtape. From my mom. She made it before she passed. Said it had all the songs she hoped I'd dance to at my wedding." Keanu paused, then placed the record gently on the player. The needle dropped, and the soft hum of static gave way to a slow, old love song, one filled with violins and the kind of lyrics no one wrote anymore. Without a word, Keanu turned to her and held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, voice filled with warmth and reverence. Sandra laughed through a sob, the kind of laugh that only comes from deep healing, and nodded. "You better." They danced slowly in the middle of that small living room, surrounded by nothing but candlelight and echoes of ghosts that no longer haunted them. And it was then, in that slow dance to her mother's voice and the lullaby of the past, that something shifted. Keanu leaned in close and whispered, "I want to grow old with you." She froze, not in fear, but in astonishment. "You mean that? I've never meant anything more." They stopped dancing, but their bodies didn't separate. Sandra reached up and gently touched his face. "I've been proposed to 4 times in my life," she said. "But this is the first time it feels like a vow." He didn't speak, only held her tighter. And in the stillness of that moment, with nothing but the soft crackle of the vinyl and the ocean sighing outside, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves stepped out of their past and into the kind of present that only years of pain, patience, and destiny can build. It wasn't just a reunion, it was resurrection. The secret they kept. From the world. It had been 3 months since that night by the ocean, the night when time stopped pretending to move forward without them, and 2 people who had spent years on separate timelines finally let their paths merge. But to the rest of the world, nothing had changed. There were no public announcements, no carefully worded press releases, no photos leaked to tabloids. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves had vanished from the spotlight, and while fans speculated and gossip sites spun their usual fantasies, the truth was far simpler and far more sacred. They had chosen silence, not to hide, but to protect what was still learning how to breathe. The beach house had become their escape, a place where the world didn't expect anything from them. They would wake up late, drink coffee barefoot, argue about which records to play, cook pasta without measuring anything, and fall asleep in each other's arms while watching old movies they once starred in, laughing not at the performances, but at how young and guarded they had been. There was healing in their routine. There was a kind of quiet joy that didn't need to be documented. But underneath that joy, there was also something growing, something deeper than romance, a kind of unspoken promise that began to form every time their hands touched in passing, or when their laughter gave way to stillness, or when one would whisper the other's name like a prayer before sleep. It was a morning in early spring when Sandra sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a sketchbook she hadn't touched in years. The pages were filled with drawings of places she wanted to go, memories she had half forgotten, and in the back, tucked between rough sketches of old movie sets, was a drawing of Keanu. Not from any reference photo, just from memory. His eyes were downcast, his jaw quiet, his presence unmistakable. She stared at the sketch for a long time, then slowly closed the book. "You drew me." Keanu's voice came softly from behind. Sandra looked up, startled, her cheeks coloring. "You weren't supposed to see that." He walked closer, gently taking the book in his hands, thumbing through it with the reverence of someone reading a sacred text. "It's beautiful," he said. "But I look sad." "You were," she replied. "Back then," he nodded, flipping the page to a clean one. Then, without asking, he picked up the pencil she'd left beside her coffee and began to draw. Sandra watched in silence, her heart beating like it did years ago during table reads and press junkets, when every accidental touch between them felt like it carried too much electricity. After a few minutes, he turned the sketchbook around. It was her, but not the version the world knew. It wasn't the red carpet Sandra. It wasn't the award-winning actress. It was her, wearing his hoodie, eyes soft, hair slightly messy, sitting at that very table with a cup of coffee and a look of peace he had never seen in her before that year. "You don't look sad here," he said. She stared at the sketch and felt something in her chest break open. "Because I'm not. They didn't say much that day, but something changed, something settled, and that night, as they lay under the stars again, this time on a blanket in the backyard of the cabin, they talked about everything they had, never dared to. They talked about the movies that changed their lives. They talked about the nights when loneliness became unbearable. They talked about past lovers who didn't understand them. They talked about the people they had lost, and how grief never ends. It only changes shape." And then Keanu turned to her, his voice barely above the rustle of wind in the trees. "Would you ever want to tell the world?" Sandra hesitated, not because she was afraid of the answer, but because she understood what that question meant. "Once you tell the world, it no longer belongs just to you." "I don't need the world to know to believe it's real," she said. "But someday, maybe. When it's strong enough to breathe on its own." Keanu nodded. "I think that's beautiful." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Promise me something and anything. If we ever go public, it won't be because someone forced us to. It'll be because we're ready to let them in." "I promise," he whispered. "This isn't theirs. It's ours." Days turned into weeks. Spring turned into early summer. Sandra started painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. Keanu began writing, quiet essays about grief, love, and what it meant to start over after believing you never would. They'd leave notes for each other around the house, on coffee mugs, in books, on mirrors. Little things like, "You're the piece I didn't know I needed," or "I found another reason to love you today." But the world never stops turning. One morning, a phone call came that threatened to shatter the quiet world they had built. Sandra's manager. Breathless, urgent. A paparazzi drone had caught a glimpse of them at a gas station up the coast. Nothing scandalous, just Keanu placing his hand gently on the small of her back as they walked inside to buy water. But it was enough to stir speculation, enough to bring headlines back to life. Within hours, the internet was flooded. Are Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock finally together? Fans rejoice over long-awaited reunion. Sources say the two have been living together in seclusion. It didn't matter that none of it was official. The world had taken notice, and the thing they had been holding close to their hearts was now under the eye of a million strangers. Sandra sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, scrolling through articles, her face unreadable. Keanu entered the room and saw the storm in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked up. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because I wanted to give this to you. Quiet, safe, sacred." She stood, walked over to him, and placed her hands on either side of his face. "You did. You gave me everything I never asked for, but always needed." He held her close, baring his face and her neck. "What do we do now?" She smiled softly. "We keep going. We live. We let them talk, but we don't let them in. Not yet. This, what we have, doesn't need a press tour." He laughed quietly. "You always know what to say." "No," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look him in the eyes. "But for the first time in a long time, I know how I feel." And then she said the words she had never said before. Not like this, not with this much clarity. "I love you, Keanu." He didn't react with shock. He didn't flinch. His eyes simply softened, as if he had been waiting years for this moment to arrive. "I've loved you since the day you spilled coffee on my script," he said. She laughed through the tears. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." And as the world buzzed outside, speculating, debating, dissecting, two hearts inside that quiet home finally decided not to care. Because some stories don't need permission to be real. Some stories, like theirs, are written not for headlines, but for healing. The day they stood in front of the world and chose each other. Summer arrived with golden skies and slower mornings. The world had moved on from the initial frenzy of seeing Sandra and Keanu together again, their names slowly drifting down the trending list, replaced by younger stars and louder scandals. But that was exactly what they'd hoped for. Time had a way of filtering noise, and when the echoes finally faded, what remained was their truth, not as an answer to fans' curiosity or a headline to feed the news cycle, but as a love that had outlasted silence, grief, hesitation, and distance. They never made a formal announcement. They never gave a sit-down interview or sold their story to a magazine. Instead, they simply lived. And in the quiet spaces between breakfast and sunset walks, between shared toothbrushes and soft laughter in unmade beds, they built something unshakable. They relearned each other. He memorized how she liked her tea now, stronger, with honey instead of sugar. She learned that he'd developed a habit of writing poems in the back of used envelopes. He'd tuck them into her coat pockets or under her pillow. Sometimes the poems were short. Sometimes they were just one line. But every word reminded her that love, in its purest form, doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up. Again and again. One evening in early autumn, Sandra sat on the front steps of the cabin, wrapped in Keanu's flannel shirt. The air had a gentle crispness to it, the kind that hinted change was coming. Keanu came up behind her, silent as always, and sat beside her with 2 mugs of hot cider. They watched the sky shift from orange to indigo in peaceful silence. "I keep thinking," she said finally, "about how long we ran in circles around each other." He smiled without looking at her. "Maybe the circle was the point." She turned to him. "How do you mean?" "We weren't lost," he said. "We were orbiting each other like stars, waiting for the right gravity to pull us in." Sandra looked down into her cup. "And now?" He placed his mug aside, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. Her heart stopped. Now, no cameras, no flashbulbs, no fancy dress or carefully timed moment. Just them, and the fading light, and a question that had lived in the breath between their silences for years. He opened it. There was no speech, no script, just his eyes. And the way his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that brought them here. Decades of friendship, years of distance, and now, this. "I don't want the world," he said quietly. "I just want you." She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she reached out, closed the box slowly, and whispered, "Yes." Because the answer had always been yes, even when she hadn't known it. Even when they had been apart, even when her heart wasn't ready to say it out loud, it had always been him. It had always been this. They didn't rush the wedding. It wasn't even a wedding in the traditional sense. There were no planners, no press releases, no designer gowns. Just an email to a handful of close friends, people who had seen them in their ugliest and their quietest, inviting them to a private gathering by the water. The subject line read, "We're finally ready." It took place at sunset, on the same beach where Keanu had whispered, "I want to grow old with you." The ocean was calm that day, the sky dressed in soft pinks and gold. Sandra wore a cream-colored linen dress with bare feet, her hair tied back simply. Keanu wore a black shirt and khakis, no tie, sleeves rolled up. Nothing formal, nothing forced. Just them, As guests took their seats, only 30 or so people, including Reeves's sister and Sandra's closest friend from her college years, the ceremony began with no music. No marching, just the sound of the waves and the gentle wind through dune grass. A mutual friend officiated, someone who knew both their ghosts and their joys. "When two souls take this long to find their way back to each other," he began, "you don't ask them why it took so long. You simply thank the universe they arrived." Keanu and Sandra faced each other, hands held, their foreheads occasionally touching as the words were spoken. They didn't exchange traditional vows. Instead, they exchanged promises they had written themselves. Raw, imperfect, real. "I promise to never disappear, even when things get hard," Keanu said, voice cracking slightly. "I promise to be the quiet beside you when words fail, and the strength beside you when storms come." "I don't need perfect. I only need us," Sandra smiled through tears. "I promise not to hide behind the version of me the world expects," she whispered. "I promise to let you love the broken parts, the tired parts, the scared parts. You've always seen me, and now I promise to stay seen." There was no ring exchange with dramatic pauses or scripted declarations. Just a quiet sliding of bands onto fingers. Just one long, quiet kiss that made several guests cry without shame. Just two people who had finally stopped running. After the ceremony, there was a simple dinner beneath string lights hung between driftwood poles. People toasted with old wine and shared stories. Some embarrassing, some sacred. There was laughter. There was music. At one point, someone found a speaker and played a song from the mixtape Sandra's mother had made, and Keanu pulled her onto the sand to dance once more. "You know," she said as they swayed, "if someone told me 20 years ago that I'd be married to Keanu Reeves, I would have laughed." He grinned. "And if someone told me that the most peaceful chapter of my life would begin in my 50s, I wouldn't have believed them either." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for coming back." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for waiting." They returned to the cabin a week later, hand in hand with no need for honeymoons or exotic distractions. They had already found their paradise in each other. One morning, Sandra sat at the same table where she had once sketched his sad face. Now she drew them both. Older, yes, but full of life. The kind of face only peace can paint. Keanu watched her from across the room, sipping coffee, admiring her like a man finally allowed to worship the art he had loved in secret for too long. The news eventually leaked, as it always does. But by the time the tabloids caught up, they were too late. The story didn't belong to them anymore. It had already become something holy, something unshakable, a secret garden that had bloomed in silence. In interviews years later, both of them would smile gently when asked. Sandra would say, "He was my best friend long before he was my husband." And Keanu would reply, "She was my peace long before she was my partner." But for those who truly knew them, those who witnessed that beach, that moment, that vow, it was something more than a fairy tale. It was a masterclass in patience, in forgiveness, in timing, in real, enduring, soul-deep love. And it all started with one gentle hug that no one saw coming. But that would go on to melt millions of hearts,